had to have this down by now. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Today is the 18th of October, and we have two very special guests with us this morning. Scott Peacock is our director of a lot of things: maintenance, technology, transportation. Did I miss anything? Facilities. Yeah. He's going to, both he and over here is our director of finance. I just want to say what a pleasure it's been to work with these two. It's just been wonderful to have this new energy in our district, and I'm really excited for them to be here this morning and just talk about their work and their roles, and then see what questions you all have. So, and then we'll have time to just talk about the elementary school afterwards. Thanks. Don't forget your mic.
Okay. And as I recall, you wanted us to talk a little bit about the levies that are on the ballot. Okay. So my name is Scott Peacock. I'm Director of Operations. And as Susie said, I oversee maintenance, custodial services, transportation, although we have a transportation supervisor, I support her, and technology in the district. So lots of things that kind of fall under my purview. And there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do around the district, and I've really enjoyed being here. It's been really fulfilling. I started May 1st at the same time Paul did, and it's been a real pleasure to be here because I said there are a lot of things to fix and there are a lot of things to do around the district. So it's been very gratifying coming into work every day, because my philosophy is that every day when I leave at the end of the day, my goal is to make sure that many things are better by the time I leave than they were when I started at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that's kind of my overall goal. That's a little bit about how I think about things. We can talk a little bit more about specifics in a minute, but that's just kind of my general introduction here in South Whidbey. Speaking about me personally, I actually came here. I'm 30 years in, almost 30 years into a career at this point in education. I started out in Snohomish as a substitute teacher back in 1992, and eventually became a principal in Snohomish, and then executive director of teaching and learning, assistant superintendent for teaching and learning and leadership development in the district, and then deputy superintendent for equity and leadership. And then I left Snohomish in 2019 to go to the Lakewood School District to be the superintendent there, where I was there for 4 years during the pandemic and such. And a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, I decided to step away from my role there, take a little bit of a break after the pandemic and all that went on there, and give myself a little space, and wanted to move over to Whidbey Island and talk to my friend Joe. And Joe said, "Hey, we've got this role here and don't know if you'd be interested." And I said, "I'm interested." So here I am. That's my story. That's a short and dirty version of it.
I'm Paul Field. I'm the Director of Finance. I also started May 1st with Scott. Started my professional accounting career in the healthcare industry, and then worked for the North Shore School District for about 10 years. Started in accounts payable and then moved into their capital projects department, where I oversaw their bond and levy spending for their capital, and then started working with their maintenance and operations teams with their budgeting and overseeing their expenditures for every year. Then I did work with Scott up in Lakewood for not quite a year, and went back to North Shore. And then when the reposting of the position here became available for just the finance piece, I took the opportunity because I live here on the island already, and happy to be here and looking forward to the rest of my career here at South Whidbey. My background.
So first, I think what we'd like to do is talk about our work, but in the context of kind of what we're doing with levies. And it's hard to talk about the levy that's on the ballot right now without talking about what we're doing with the levy dollars that we're collecting right now, especially in my case, talking about capital projects and facilities, because those things are very connected. What we're doing now is going to continue if the levy passes in November. And so I really want you to kind of see what the levy pays for, but also to think about how that fits in the context of the work that's happening right now. Well, first, I think Paul and I, as we talked about this, wanted to take a moment to step back a little bit and just kind of give you a very quick overview of what it means, what a levy is, versus what a bond is. Because in our district, it can get a little bit confusing for folks because we have levies that we run every 4, or in the case of a capital levy, 6 years. And then we have the bond that was approved in 2023. And basically, the slogan is, it's not exactly accurate. It's kind of an old slogan, but I'm going to use it anyway, is bonds are for building. I don't know why my voice got scratchy all of a sudden, but bonds are for building and levies are for learning. And what that means is that a bond, the one that we approved in 2023, really funds major construction projects. It funds renovations to the schools on a broader scale. Because renovations or full out construction, either rebuilding or actually building anew, which we're not doing in this case, but with a bond. But bonds allow us to do big projects and ask the community for their support to fund big projects on a larger scale that cost more, because it allows us to finance the funding over a period of 20 or 30 years, depending on the duration. And Paul can speak a little bit more to that.
So when we passed the bond, it was $79.9 million. And when we sell the bond, we get all the money that we sell right away. So we sold $30 million of bonds. We got a deposit into our bank account for $30 million. Our two levies are broken down between like 2.5 million for capital and 3.9 for EP&O, which is the learning portion of the levy. We get those in two collections, October and April, when people pay their property taxes. So those typically, we want to make investments with bonds that are going to last the lifespan that we pay the bond back over 20 to 25 years. So it's major intrusive investments that we need a lot of cash up front to be able to pay for. And then it helps the taxpayer because we pay it over time. Instead of having to try to pay back $40 million in 4 years, we have 25 years to spread those payments out across the tax base. So levy investments are typically for major repairs, but not necessarily the intrusive investment that we do with the bond. So that's kind of the two differences. And we have two levies running. We have our capital levy, which we use for major maintenance and repairs, but it also funds our technology in our classroom. So our ongoing subscriptions and the replacement of our Chromebooks and other learning apparatuses, technology-based in the classroom. And then our EP&O levy picks up where the state falls short on things for like coaching, and we pay more in food service than we're funded for by the state. We pay more in transportation than funded by the state. Our MSOX allocation from the state, which is material, supplies, and other costs for things like insurance and utilities and maintenance supplies, really only covers our insurance cost and most of our utilities. So everything else that runs the district is picked up by our EP&O levy. So that's the difference between the two levies that are running. The maintenance and technology is $2.5 million a year. And then the EP&O, which will be roughly 3.7 to 3.9, depending on our enrollment, they're both capped. We can only collect $2.5 million for technology and capital levy. And then there's a slight variation in our EPO because it's capped by our student head count, but it'd be roughly fall between 3.9 and 3.7 unless we had explosive growth, which we haven't in 2 decades. It's been declining enrollment, except for this year. We have a tiny little uptick, it looks like. But that's kind of how the functions of those work. So on a $22 million, $21 million overall budget for the district, this $3.9 million is a very large chunk of that funding for the district. What Scott and I are here to talk mainly about is the technology and capital levy, because that's the work that Scott does most of.
Okay.
We'll talk some about the bond if we have bond questions later.
Okay. So does that all make sense to you? Okay, we're kind of financing a loan and the bond, and then levies are pay as you go based on the collections we have over the period of time that the levy runs.
Pending approval by vote.
Yes, and a bond has to be approved by 60% of the voters. Levies have to be approved by 50% plus 1. So the amounts we're asking for is smaller. The threshold is lower in terms of community approval, but still an important bar to meet. Yeah.
The renewal of our existing 2 levies is
Mm.
on the November ballot, which should be in your mailbox today.
Anybody know, do our levies generally pass?
They do.
Yes, I don't think we've failed a levy in 30 plus years, 40 years.
Been a long time. I don't know the data on for this district, but very supportive.
Last time we did the EP&O levy 3 years ago, it was 69% approval.
So no phone banking required at this time?
Tell your friends.
Yeah.
You get the word out. Yes, this is important.
Especially with what happened with the voters pamphlet, please.
Yes, there's a lot of
Please.
confusion around that.
So we're very fortunate in that situation. If we don't pass a levy, there will be major conversation immediately because it's roughly a 20% cut to our current budget that we'd have to feather out until we either figure where we missed on our levy and our request and it would be, there'd be a scramble to close
Yeah.
that gap right away.
Right. And typically, levies by law can only be run twice in a calendar year on the ballot. So if it doesn't pass in November, then there would be 2 opportunities potentially to run a levy again in next year. But we don't hopefully have to talk about that or think about that. So, but anyway, that's kind of the limitation we work under as a school district as well. Okay, so talking a little bit about the capital projects levy. So there are different pieces to this. It's technology, facilities, and safety. And the biggest part of this is the facilities piece. Technology is also a very large piece, and safety kind of weaves into both of those things as we think about subscriptions for various technology things, access to buildings and that sort of thing. There's a lot of overlap with technology and safety and facilities. And of course, facilities, we're always thinking about safety for our kids. So I kind of weave some of these themes into what I'll talk about today. But technology, essentially, all of our students have one-to-one Chromebooks in our district. And it's a little bit different model, secondary versus elementary. At the secondary level, we have our students getting Chromebooks one-to-one. They actually get a Chromebook. And at the elementary level, we have Chromebooks in groups, and they don't take them home. So we have enough for all the kids. I want to make sure I had it right. Sometimes I flip it and misspeak. But we have Chromebooks available here for each student, and they don't take them home. But, you know, part of our process with the technology and a big part of what the levy funds is the ongoing replacement and maintenance of the Chromebooks and the programs that are on those Chromebooks. So, and all the subscriptions that we have to pay for with that. So the technology levy pays for that and pays for some of our staff to help some staff. We have one of those individuals here, our tech TOSAs, who support our teachers in the use of technology. Because one of the important things about having technology in our schools is that it's not just about giving people computers or just putting a program out there. People have to know how to use it. They need to know how to turn it on and maintain the device, but then also they need to know how to access the programs that we have. And then just as important, and it's often overlooked, is being able to use the program effectively in an instructional setting and being able to use that seamlessly so that kids can access the things that they need in class and have the resources and supports that they need and are confident that their teachers are able to show them how to do that. So we have staff that we've hired under the technology levy as well who support the teachers in that mission. And then we also have a technology director in our district who helps maintain all of the systems. The other part I think that's often overlooked, and it's similar to facilities, is there's a whole lot of stuff on the back end of technology that people don't see that the levy pays for. Things like networking, new panels and new switches and stuff, things like that that help us to access the internet and the outside world and to have an integrated system within the district that runs smoothly when we need it to. So we have to maintain all those systems and then maintain and improve our access as well so that we have people can access the internet or anywhere on the campuses in our district. And that's one of our goals is you'll even see out on the athletic fields, most of them, you can even access the internet there. So our goal is to make sure that it's really anytime, anywhere types of access here in the district. The levy pays for all of that and allows us to keep up with changes in those technological developments. In terms of facilities, this is probably the biggest chunk that the technology facilities and capital levy pays for. So on the back side of the brochure that you have in front of you, there's a whole bulleted list. And I'm going to try to categorize these a little bit. One of the things that I've found since I've been here, and I mentioned this earlier when I started talking. When I came here, there was a lot of things there's a lot of things to fix, and there are in any district. There's a complex systems, and there's people using them, and kids aren't always friendly on the things that they use. They're tough sometimes on the things that they use, and that's okay. That's why we're here to help them. What we do, but we have to do more than just fix things that break. We have to think about things in a systemic way. I mean, I can go fix a pump on a septic system. But if not me personally, I'm not getting right in there and fixing it, rolling up my sleeves and doing that. But when I'm thinking about how to approach repairing a septic pump, for example, I have to think about why that pump went bad to begin with. I have to think about the whole system. I have to think about, if I put in a new pump, what does it mean to have a panel to control it? We have to think about things in a systemic way. And so while things do need to be fixed and we have to deal with the immediacy, there also is a lot of planning that goes into fixing things. And so one of the things that you'll see in here is a lot of repairs and updates to things and upgrades, which is getting at both fixing and addressing systemic issues. So I'll just use the first bullet for a good example. One of the things that the capital levy pays for is furniture. It can pay for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And so when we think about a classroom, and we think often about the student desks and chairs, well, the previous levy started that process, and we started replacing student desks and chairs in classrooms, but it didn't finish it. It wasn't, we have to continue that work. And so here at the elementary school, for example, at our intermediate this year, the current levy is going to finish up the conversion over to the new student desks and chairs to VS furniture this year. And then we'll next year hopefully be able to get to the primary and be able to finish up all different size chairs and desks for the different grades. And the levy pays for that. And then as we move forward, thinking about teacher desks and chairs, we have quite a mishmash in our district, and it would be nice eventually to be able to shift over to thinking, once we take care of the student desks and chairs, to be able to think about how we systematically go through and upgrade all of the staff desks and chairs.
It's interesting at the elementary school because you go from 10, 12, and 14-inch chairs depending on the grade, because the kids are all growing. By the time you get to middle school, it's all pretty standard size, but here you have a really different spectrum of size child. So the elementary furniture is always a little tough to be able to sit, especially now we have TK, their tiniest kids,
Right.
to fifth graders that are, pushing 5'5". It's a interesting puzzle at times.
It is an interesting puzzle, and some of those desks have different features to get depending on the age, whether they have book back hangers or not, or under the top shelving under the tops, that sort of thing. So thinking about furniture, that's one of those things. We're thinking about ADA access right now. Again, I'm going to illustrate how what we're doing now is shifting into the future. Right now, I'm in the process of working on a project to add ADA push panels and connect those to our keyless access system at the high school, especially focusing on those areas where there's a lot of public access, the auditorium, the gym, the front door, and our entrance in the back where our special needs students come in and get dropped off in the bus. We want to be able to develop the independence and have the access for them during the school day to be able to go into every space in the school. And so we're starting that now, but that's a process that has to continue to grow. And so the levy would pay for that continued access, especially in those places. And this is where I'm going to hit this a couple of times, where the work that we're doing is different from the bond. Like, for example, I'm starting the work at the high school, but there's a lot of work going to be done at the high school, and some of this will be covered under the bond. But some of this access won't be provided at the district office, for example, the South Campus. That bond doesn't cover any work there. Well, that's work that has to be done. And then there's other, and also at our transportation and maintenance building. So just a few examples there. Again, thinking about things that aren't covered under the bond everywhere in the district. This year, what we're doing is we did a regrade of our softball fields. So we get some better drainage there and better quality playing surface there. It's grass and diamond dust fields, but nonetheless, we've improved that. We're going to have to update the tennis courts next year and have those have those renovated. We're working on updating and upgrading the surface in the auxiliary gym, which isn't going to be covered under the bond. And you may have heard about the main gymnasium at the high school and the flooding. I'll tell you, that is a project. Most of that is being paid for by insurance because of the flooding, but there are some upgrades that we're doing with painting to really spruce the place up that are going to be covered under the levy as well. So things like that. What we're going to continue to do is go through and we've upgraded and repaired HVAC control systems and units. We had several of our units at the high school that weren't operational this summer. All but one is operational now. And we've still got a couple years before those units are replaced. So the levy needed to address that because we can't wait 2 years to have heating and cooling at the high school before we replace all those units. So the levy is paying for that. We just updated our control system so we can better control and monitor everything across the district. That will support any future upgrades, whether they're funded by the bond or the levy. Keying is a future project. We haven't done a whole lot with that yet, rekeying our district, but we have a bazillion keys for everything. And a bazillion people have those keys. They're all over the community. And we need, for security reasons, need to rekey, control access to the building, monitor that, and have a simplified and more elegant, what I would say is a more elegant system. So that's something that is going to happen with the levy. Plumbing systems, water heater systems, we're in the midst of replacing those right now, especially in areas that are not touched by the bond. We've got water well. I don't know if any of you know that, but we have a well in our district that needs to be renovated. We're in the process of starting that work right now. That's huge, both from the standpoint of making sure the water is clean as well as distributed to the schools. The other piece that is at the back end of that water system is we have stormwater. Again, we don't think about that, but all of this water from our facilities runs off into the watershed. And right now it's aging. Well, we need to be on top of the fact that we've got to manage that and make sure that the water is retained and has the opportunity to cleanse itself before it goes into the watershed. And so the levy is going to cover renovation of those stormwater systems and retention ponds. Roofs. I think we're pretty good right now. We had a lot of repairs that we did this summer, but we're going to continue to go through. We actually have prioritized roofs around the district for replacement. Right now, we've replaced a few, but we're going to continue to continue that work beyond just making simple repairs to leaks right now and replacing roofs that need to be replaced that are not going to be covered by the bond. And then I think the other thing is we've got a lot of parking lots that need to be redone. And at the high school and the elementary school, that's going to happen under the bond. But the South Campus Transportation and Maintenance Building, those are two facilities that desperately need renovation as well. So the levy would be able to pay for that so that our buses are going to have a good parking lot to come in and turn around on that's safe and at the South Campus where people are bringing the primary age kids in and visiting our district office and community partners there, we need to have a parking lot that's works well and operates well for them. So that highlights a lot of the things that are going to be covered under the levy. Lots of systems work. And then there's all the things that come up that we need to fund that can be big projects that we didn't even know about, because that's the reality of the buildings that we're in any school district. Things happen, things break. We don't expect it. We don't plan for it. Sometimes they cost a lot of money, and being able to have a capital levy to be able to support that work is truly important because it allows us to protect the learning experience of our students, and all the funding that comes in through the EP&O levy, we can protect that. So when we have an emergency around our facilities, we know that we can continue to buy textbooks. We know that we can continue to support the learning in the classroom, and that those things aren't going to have an impact, as significant an impact on our children. So,
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason we can do the repairs to the gym so quickly is because we had levy money in the capital fund before, so we could get them started before insurance started paying out.
absolutely, yes, we were able to front end load all of those repairs.
So without that, we would have waited until insurance paid out and then started the work, and we wouldn't have gotten it in the winter, likely.
Or we would have paid out a fund balance.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
fund balancer approached OSPI with an emergency need to
Yeah.
get funding. But yeah, that is a correct statement that having funds in the capital levy, we were to get started, working with the board to get emergency resolution, to get it done as quickly. I know it doesn't feel like it's quick, but it's moving very fast in the world of getting something like that done. So yes, having the levy in hand did help that process for sure.
I have a question, and it's kind of a two-part question.
Yeah.
I'll try to boil it into one, but everybody,
2 is fine.
it has to do with what the state pays for versus what has to go into a bond or a special. When I look at this list, I see things like ensure healthy drinking water. Okay, that to me is a primal need that any school in the world should have.
Right,
I
right.
mean, that's pretty darn basic.
Right.
Safety, especially, like we've all been through the little scare at the high school that we had, you know, rekeying, security around the water systems to make sure somebody doesn't dump something in the water system.
Right.
Even sewage and getting rid of sewage is an issue that I think is pretty basic. Okay. And that should be something that's paid for by the state through some other function and not something where we have to raise special money.
Right.
I don't
We
know
would
how
agree
other
with
school
that.
districts work, such as, let's say, Bellevue, which is just buying water from the Bellevue systems, right, or Seattle.
Mhm.
And is the water, the sewer that you're buying at one of those other school districts just considered to be part of the money you get from the state? But since we have a well, we have to pay extra to maintain that well. We have septic systems, so we have to pay extra to do that. How does that split work?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of part one. And part two of the question, and I'll throw them both out right now just to make sure, is I hear you distinguishing between Chromebooks and paper books. Okay. And I think the state pays for the paper books. They pay for the whatever postage it is and transportation to get these things in here, which one kind of sounds like an internet backbone. The other one is a Chromebook is the tool that sits in front of a kid most of the time.
Right.
Why is there this difference? I'm missing where this line is drawn and why things fall out of that line.
So I'll speak to, we get an allocation from the state, like as I'd said before, is MSOCs, which is materials, supplies, and other cost. So materials and supplies is that learning band, and other cost is our utility cost, and every other cost you could think of that's outside of basically payroll. The amount of money we get from the state for those two things covers the insurance that we're required to by the state to have through the Washington State Risk Pool, and the majority of our utilities, but not all of them. So our electrical and gas bills. After that, the money from the state for MSOCs is exhausted because the state doesn't fund to maintain the buildings and the utilities and the insurance that we're required to have. So without the levy to pick up that difference, we would be spending fund balance or reducing classrooms or increasing classroom size, but having to reduce teachers to close that gap. And that's the battle across the state.
And so that's how the state calculates the way schools are funded is they use what's called a prototypical funding model, which essentially is a formula. The MSOC's formula is very complicated. I don't know that I've ever met anyone who can fully explain to me exactly how it works. People who are very good in finance, it's a very complicated formula, but it's applied to every school district regardless of their circumstances because it's based on if you have so many students, this is what you should have. So that formula gets applied as a framework to districts regardless of the circumstances in which the school exists, essentially. And so if you have a well versus purchasing, you have aging buildings versus new buildings, that prototypical funding model applies to everybody the same, which is why school districts everywhere, because we're all different and we all have things where we operate efficiently and other places where we need improvements or, or need to address needs. That's where the gap falls in different ways in different districts. And so in our case, there's that gap has led to some significant deficits in areas that we have needed to get caught up in. And fortunately, the community is very supportive in allowing us to be able to do that. And then so even while we're addressing needs that have to be addressed in the district around well water, around septic and those kinds of things, at the same time, we have to continue to push the state to fully fund education and move beyond the prototypical funding model, because the prototypical funding model does not fund everything. It doesn't even really even pretend to fund everything. So
It sounds like you're saying that that's like a legislative advocacy
it is.
issue.
It is
for
very
the
much
board
so.
here.
Yes. And so when we talk about so then to the other portion of your question, which is related to technology and teaching and learning. So the prototypical funding model applies to how learning resources are purchased too, and the resources we get that fund that. Then at the local level, we decide how we're going to apply those resources in purchasing the materials that support teaching and learning. So sometimes we buy paper materials because we want the students to have access to something in the classroom that's physical. And then sometimes we purchase, and we often purchase textbook subscriptions or subscriptions that allow us to access materials online, because then students have anytime, anywhere access to it. But that is a question of purpose and how we meet our educational purpose and meet the needs that we identify for our students here in the district. And then we consider, based on that, what is the best resource to then meet that need. Sometimes it's paper, sometimes it's technology. More often than not, almost entirely, it's a combination of the two.
Christy has on the screen is our MSOC allocation. This is from my budget presentation at the beginning of the year. So the state gave us 1.5 million and our actual MSOC's cost is 2.3. So without the levy, we would have a $742,000 shortfall. That's just things that fall into that category of material supplies and other costs. Thank you, Christy.
And the legislature increased the increase in MSOCs this year to counter inflation, but they increased it to a 1.9% raise. Correct me on these where I get them wrong.
Yeah.
Where the actual statewide increase was something like 3.5 or 3.7%. So
Give us I believe it was 1.9% increase in MSOCs and a 3.7% for IPD, which is what gets passed through in certificated salary cost for the cost of certificate for all salary costs. All salary costs, the state said we're going to give you 3.7% more because that's the increase to cost of living. But then they turn around and increase our MSOCs cost 1.9. So it's not keeping up.
So, and excuse my ignorance here.
It's not. These are great questions.
Just don't have time to, dig into some of this stuff.
Mhm.
A few years ago, there was some law that was passed that said levies were being misused and they had to go and change the levy. I was down in another part of the state at that point, and there was this big shuffle, kerfuffle, et cetera,
Mhm.
about where money was coming from and going to. Is it possible that something that is near and dear to my heart and I could advocate for would be like counselors in the school or
Yes.
a separate sped director or something like that? Can those people be paid for by a levy, or is that considered
Yes.
something that can't be? And where's that line? Because if it's up to me to go back to the state and battle the state for funds to support something I want to support, that seems like I'm wasting my time. If it's something where I can go and I can push the school board,
Mhm.
and twist their arm and try to get other people on board and get into levy funds, that I can then go and expend some energy in a local community to drive that funding, then that sounds like something I have a
Yeah,
possibility
yeah.
of doing. So where's that line, and what can I do as an individual in this community to try to move some of that funding around and to say, okay, let's not make it $750,000. Let's make it $1 million. Let's make it, well, 998,000. Okay, so it doesn't sound so big.
Yeah.
And then we can provide some of these other services that I think are desperately needed in our school.
So what you're referring to, and what I believe you're referring to as levy, is when they changed the levy swap and they capped it by a cost per student or a cost per thousand. So there's two limits now in the current levy. I don't want to cite the dollar amounts because I don't think I'll get it right. But it used to be a percentage, a cost per thousand, or a maximum per student, whichever is less. We're always going to be on the
Right.
student side because our assessed value is so high with all the waterfront property on South Whidbey. Before then, there really wasn't a limit. You could ask your community for as much as they were willing to do against their assessed value. So it just changed the landscape because they thought it was leveling the playing field, and the state was going to collect more levy dollars and disperse it more evenly across the state. Because you have schools in Eastern Washington that even if they assessed against every assessed value they have, the assessed value is so low that they can't gather the funds that like a Bellevue or Seattle or Issaquah can. So that was their effort to try to level the playing field, but it's my opinion not working out as intended because there are some districts that really got the short end of that stick. And they keep changing how they fund. We had a regionalization at one time that was upwards of 24%, and it's down to 16. And that's an additional money they would give us on top of the base allocation. And they keep changing that downward every year. We used to have experience factor that started at 6 or 8% and is down to 1%. So our funding just keeps getting reduced, and how they've changed, keep playing with this model to try to get it to work. But they're still short funding. To
And
answer your question about where to petition, special education funding would be the best place that you could try to petition the state to get that more fully funded, because it's required by us to do it. And then we're always paying out of the levy to close the special education funding gap because it's required and needed. And we are always having to bump into the levy to finish that, to fully fund it. as
And
it's
with the
needed.
state special education funding, it's not just the state end, but the federal funds required through IDEA are only funded at 20% of what they should be. So you have an 80% gap on the federal side as well.
right.
So the school board, the school board can shift allocations of the money that the district has. The issue right now is the district does not have enough money for everything we need. So it's a choice of where those cuts are, and the board can make some of those decisions. What I think is going to be more effective is finding the targeted places to talk to our legislatures, because our current representatives have been very responsive to education asks and have gotten wins. The reason we still have a transition to kindergarten program this year is because Representative Shavers went to the mat for it. He listened to a group of school board members, administrators, and students who went down from several districts and spoke to the need for it and made sure that there was a carve out for it. So having a specific cause, and mental health is huge because they have slightly raised the allocation for mental health in schools.
They did. Yeah.
It was not enough for a mental health counselor in a district this size, but it was a little bit more money for it. But something targeted like that, you could talk to a legislator about to try to get higher funding for that in particular.
It's all driven by, I'm going to go back to this idea again and again. It's all driven by the prototypical funding model. For example, an elementary school of 400 students might get 0.02 of a psychologist, for example, in that formula. It's a ridiculously low amount. And that's how much funding you would get for a psychologist from the state. And then all of these different roles, these people, the salaries, all these different roles, administrators, principals, different certificated staff and class. They have a certificated staff formula, they have a classified staff formula, and they have an administrative staff formula. And so all of these people, they give you fractions of those people for the amount of kids that would be typically, that a typical size school would have, and then they prorate it from there. So it's all driven by that. So if, when you look at the prototypical funding model, if there are areas of staffing or need, then, social emotional support, for example, a specialist on staff to provide help with social emotional support beyond counseling. These are all pieces of the formula that are very small, and they all add up. And then they total all that up, and then we get that money, and then we have to decide how to use it. But the cumulative effect of all of that understaffing and all of that under allocation for multiple positions across the district adds up to big dollars.
Well,
So,
and Scott, they also don't fund at the actual rate it costs to employ the employee.
Exactly.
So
That's
for
what Paul's saying.
example, they think that a teacher is worth 60,000. So not only is your allocation incredibly low, but then you're only funded 60,000. So it's kind of similar to when like your doctor's office can't bill the insurance for the rate that it costs to provide the service. That's the same situation school districts are in as well.
Right. They calculate it based on an average annual salary of a person. Well, if you have a district where you have many, many people who have worked more than 20 years, they're going to be above that average. So a district like South Whitby that has a lot of very experienced teachers on the staff, they don't get as much money. They don't get the money to cover all the staff salaries because it's driven by an average salary. And so that's a big problem in the funding piece as well, to Andrea's point.
And that 60,000 is the start of the pay scale here. That's a brand new teacher, which is fantastic for a brand new teacher. But for someone, to Scott's point, no, it's not.
So if you think about it, like looking at compounding it, right? So the prototypical model says that we should have, I think it's like 0.5 of a nurse for the whole district.
Yes, I believe that's
So
correct. Yep.
0.5 of a nurse, we have 2 nurses, and neither of them cost what the 30,000 the state is giving us. So if it's 0.5 of a nurse, they're going to give us 0.5 of the average annual salary, which would be about 30,000. But we have 2 employees that cost well above 30,000 and should cost well
You can
above
go down the line
30,000.
with staffing, custodians, it's the same way, food service staff, it's the same way, the number of people that they fund us for those outside the classroom positions. We staff higher than that because it's needed to maintain our facilities and to serve our students.
I think we're supposed to have like 1.3 principals.
And
Yeah, it's something like that. It's a really amazingly low amount.
about a quarter of the number of paraeducators that we have.
Yeah.
And that's also not including the fact that the state mandates a certain number of paid leave for these people and pays us, I think they mandate 12 days a year and pay us for 4 days a year, and the rest comes out of the levy. So when Scott says that the prototypical funding model is broken, this is what we're talking about.
But that,
In some ways, it's better than what we had before. In other ways, it's not.
so that's what makes it sound like it's impossible to go up against the state and say, make it happen, make it happen, make it happen. And we can go off to Representative Schaefer, whoever, and try to make that inroads. But it seems to me that it's a heck of a lot easier to go back and say, okay, can we get another 200,000 or whatever on a levy, or 300,000 or 400,000, whatever, because here are the numbers. Let's just do the numbers, folks.
Except for that the levies are capped.
Yeah.
So we would have to
To Paul's point.
legislatively overturn the cap on the levies. So the state has said,
It's that expression.
and we
that
don't
is-
care if you
yeah.
can raise it.
Because it's one target,
Well,
right? The
Yeah.
minute
and
you start
it's-
talking about, I've got sped,
Mhm.
then you've alienated everybody else who doesn't have sped.
Yep.
Right? If you go after water systems, then you alienate, you may bring in Eastern Washington because
yeah.
all of them have wells, or most of them have wells. And, you can go after these small things, but then 500 small things.
So
Go after removing the cap on a levy sounds to me like that's one thing you can go after and have some effect.
and there's a lot of emphasis and focus on that. What I'm hearing you say is that you want to know where to put your voice. And what I would say is that OSPI oftentimes will organize task force around like, and they will gather input. You can participate in these panels. They're usually virtual, and you can have conversations with them to hopefully influence the policy recommendations that they're making to the state. And they have different task force around special education. They have task force around school funding. And because of where the state's at, I would imagine, Paul and Scott, let me know if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that there's probably a couple task force looking at funding. And
Oh,
so
yeah, there always is.
joining those could be a place where your voice can hopefully have some influence and shift. But
And if you just need like a glimmer of hope, Todd, I think that like it feels really big and impossible and changeless, but lots of change happens that way over time. And since I work in autism intervention, I'm just thinking of the time before 2007 when mental health parity laws passed and no autism intervention was covered by any health insurance, and it is now, and that's the standard protocol. And that largely happened through parents advocating on behalf of their own children in collaboration with professionals, but largely driven by parents, because I think legislators are really moved by parents more than they are by like someone who's profiting from the advocacy.
I would add too that when you, one of the things that's really terrific about the school board here is they're very active with the state, paying very close attention to priorities of the different organizations, especially the School Directors Association in Washington State. And the School Directors Association and the Administration Association, WASA, AWSP, the Principals Association, tend to be pretty aligned around their priorities. They usually identify very key areas around funding that are very much aligned every year. So if you're attending to the board meetings, especially when they're processing what's on the legislative agenda every year and what seems to be out there, if you're watching, even just watching through the board, that will give some focal points for activism that then helps to create advocacy that contributes to the advocacy around the state, because joining in where other voices are heard has proven to make a difference. I'll give you an example. Career and technical education funding a few years ago was significantly increased due to a lot of advocacy around the state, helping to support students who may not be necessarily going to college or maybe going to two-year school. What does that look like? How do we support students so that they have a full range of professional choices going through high school? CTE funding increased. This last year, special education funding increased. It's still not enough, but it increased a bit. And the state really worked, the legislature really took a close look at that and made some changes. We have transitional kindergarten now because that was advocated across the state. And I can remember, I don't know, maybe it was a dozen years or so, we didn't even have full day kindergarten. Now we have full day kindergarten fully funded, and then transitional kindergarten. They monkeyed around with it a little bit and changed the funding model, but it's there and we have it. And then counseling. About a year and a half ago, there was additional allocation for some counseling resources as well and staffing. So it does happen, especially if we tend to where those priorities are and where the legislators seem to be making movement, we can kind of maximize the benefits there, I think, with collective voices.
And my understanding is that most like legislators and representatives have staffers on their phone lines answering all the calls and like writing down what people care about. And so you have to have a lot of people call about a certain topic for it to get from staffer to the person. And so if you can, organize like a little phone bank and get 50 people all to call about a topic at once, it blips the radar and goes to the person you want it to go to more likely. So thinking of those kinds of things that you can do might be helpful.
And to the prioritization point that both of you made, the Washington State School Directors Association, WSSDA.org, WSSDA, has a legislative priorities page. If you're feeling overwhelmed with, I don't know where to start, looking at those priorities, which were created by polling school boards. We did that recently. We talked about what our priorities were and passed that up to WASDA. And every one of the ones that was on our list is ending up on their list again. So they are very responsive to input from the school boards. And so they list their legislative priorities for the year. And so if parents reinforce that, and to Scott's point, WASA and WASBO and all of those usually, and the unions as well, have similar overlapping or identical points. So if you can reinforce, if you can pick one of those items and put your emphasis into there, to your point, they'll get a lot more input on those items and are more likely to actually take action on those items. And I'm also happy to go over those with anyone offline. I've done it with a couple of the folks who come to these meetings, just sit down and talk, because they give us an advocacy handbook at the yearly convention and talk about how to advocate and what to advocate for and all of that.
Important.
I sent Christy over some slides. We're gonna just quickly just take a look at what the bond's working on. It's really, on this one, you scroll down to the picture of the playground. So that's our current setup there. That green area in the lower left-hand corner is where the new play structure will be. And then over on the right-hand side, it's still to be determined, will be there in that light brown area of kind of the free play area. If you want to go down to the next slide, keep going. Keep going. There's the actual new structure that'll be over the AstroTurf or something very similar to that unit for the elementary school. We are fingers crossed trying to get that done this summer. The issue is with the bond work is, since we have two sites, it's all being taken into one. It's the permitting of it, specifically the surface water management piece of it. So we're working hard to try to get the playground broken off as its own set so we can get that work done. That's the main thing we hopefully will see this summer. I can't promise it yet, but we're getting closer. Christy, if you'll flip over to the other, yeah, there's some other, just this is all kind of up in the air. We have ideas of what we're looking for. So on this, I just want to show the rendering of the high school. Keep on going down. So that's potentially what the new high school could look like with the siding. It's a metal siding, a louvered kind of metal siding. It's wide at the bottom, it gets narrow at the top to kind of make it look like a tree going up. That is roughly the color palette. Go ahead and go to the next one. It goes around the other side of the building. Keep on going down. One more, I think it is. There we go. So this is kind of from the other angle. That siding goes all the way around. There's a new covered entryway. So this is looking over by where the theater is. That blue band right now is just kind of there to see if we want to put a logo or some design on that side of the building. But this is the rough renderings or early renderings of what the building could look like with the siding materials that we've gone through. It's a combination of brick veneer and then that metal siding in different spots. Then the interior of the courtyard has some more high sheen stuff. It's easier to clean. That's where kids congregate, kind of. And then the lighting's more directional down to help with upward light pollution, and all converted to LED. So I just wanted to share that from the bond. It's just fun to share as we're moving through. I know the process is taking it's taking the normal amount of time, but it feels like it's long. So we're still designing. We needed to get the bond passed before we could design the specific things we wanted to do. So those are just the two things I wanted to share with the bond, is some renderings as it's moving through. Yeah, so that's the current high school entry. It'll have a new kind of covered entryway. If the Eagle's going to be there, still to be determined. That made me move back to the back of the courtyard It'll still exist, but it may be moved because surface water and there's like an egress situation with where it's currently placed. So we're working with the students of where can we move the eagle and keep it on the campus, the carved eagle from class of 99, I think, or 94 maybe it says on it. I forget what year it is. But yeah, so I just wanted to share that as we're moving through on that process. And that was the two main charges of the bond at the high school was the siding, the roof, and then the HVAC system. And this is what the siding may look like as we keep moving forward. That's all I had related to the bond, unless there's any specific questions.
And the architects have been really responsive to the bond team. Talking about, you saw that regional palette and look about the farm, field, and sea, that really wanted to be responsive to what that team identified as the feel of South Whitby.
Want to see the levy in action, come to a night game here in the next night or so. We're working on the lights on the football field as part of the levy to upgrade them to LED. They were on this morning and only half of them on, and it was amazingly bright. So
Yeah, the football game next week everything should be fully installed. We're getting the lights around the field up right now, so that's going to be great. And then we're also getting lighting in the grandstands, because right now we only have lighting on one end of the grandstands, but now there will be lighting in all of the grandstands, and it'll be quite bright, but also controllable remotely. So it's going to be kind of cool.
Well, I'm very grateful to the two of you to come and
Thank you for
enlighten
having
us on all these important
Been
initiatives.
great to be here.
Thank you. Any other questions before we end? We have some great other speakers coming up. I'll be sharing that. And we're going to be doing a night Zoom with all of our specialists coming up. I'll get that information out so you can just learn a little more about what's happening with all of our specialist classes and see if other folks can attend, since we're going to be doing it Zoom in the evening. So I appreciate it and would love to hear if there's specific folks you all would like to hear from as well. So thank you very much. That's kind of brings us to our end. Thank you. Thanks, Scott and Paul. Really appreciate it.